The shutdown deadline countdown continues. And right now on the Senate floor, ahead of a pivotal vote, we do have Senator Rand Paul, Republican out of Kentucky, speaking now.
Debt must be addressed. Despite tough talk, deficits and debt inevitably keep rising. We now have over $36 trillion in debt. Unlike past presidents, though, President Trump created the Department of Government Efficiency, affectionately known as DOGE, to identify wasteful programs and eliminate them. Despite DOGE working around the clock, identifying appalling waste of taxpayers' dollars, this bill continues to fund the same programs that are funding the waste and fraud that's been located. How can that be? If we've located the waste and fraud, why are we not telling them reduced foreign aid? If the foreign aid budget is full of all kinds of crazy left-wing advocacy and nonsense, reduce the amount of money you give him. This bill will give them the same amount of money they got last year. This bill allows foreign aid to continue. It doesn't incorporate any of the DOGE cuts. It doesn't cut waste. This bill embraces the waste. It allows the waste to continue. This bill doesn't respect the taxpayer. It continues to throw their money away. This bill continues the Biden levels of spending that caused historic inflation, that caused prices to rise, that caused people to be outraged to vote for a new president. Why in the world would we continue the same spending levels that led to the debt, that led to the inflation that is plaguing us? This malpractice is compounded by the fact that President Trump and DOGE made it easy for Congress to fix. They actually told us where the waste was and where the waste and abuse was, and told us how to root it out, how to remove it. The waste found by DOGE truly shocks the conscience. Taxpayers paid $25,000 for an LGBT trans opera in Colombia. They spent $2 million on sex changes in Guatemala. They spent $1.5 million advancing DEI initiatives in Serbia. They spent $6 million on tourism in Egypt. They spent $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. Some of the USAID's programs have actually gone beyond woke absurdity into pouring money and support to people who are the enemies of the United States. The agency provided millions of dollars to EcoHealth, which funded the dangerous research in Wuhan, which in all likelihood created and caused the pandemic. From this account, also millions of dollars went to support agriculture in Afghanistan, including fertilizer for the poppy fields grown by the Taliban. And yet, even after all that DOGE has uncovered, and I commend them, Congress is still on the verge of passing a bill that fully funds foreign aid. Many in this chamber think it's wasteful to do all these things, and they say, well, why should we keep spending money on foreign aid that is paying for sex changes in Guatemala, and yet the funding levels in this bill stay the same. These are the same funding levels for the foreign aid that were occurring under the Biden administration. Let me say that again and clearly. This bill fully funds the outrageous foreign aid programs that Elon Musk and DOGE have exposed. Something doesn't make sense here. While Congress seems slow to open its eyes to waste and abuse, Secretary Rubio has acted. He recently said that the United States is canceling 83% of the foreign aid contracts. I'm for that. And in fact, that's what my amendment will do. My amendment will take the contracts, the dollar amount of the contracts that President Trump and Secretary Rubio have canceled, and put them into language so they don't get funded. Why in the world would we not be for getting rid of the funding for the crazy programs we're trying to get rid of? Something doesn't make sense here. President Trump and his team identified the cuts that need to be made, but it is ultimately Congress, not the executive, that has the power of the purse. Congress has to act to make the cuts identified by the administration a reality. And on that score, the bill under consideration today is a disappointment. The bill is a disappointment to those who believe that congressional leadership should have used the 3 months since they came into office. Since Doge and Elon Musk have identified this waste, they should have used that waste and incorporated it into the spending bill. None of the Doge cuts, none of Elon Musk's suggestions have been incorporated into the spending bill. The spending bill continues spending at the Biden levels. The spending bill will be, when everybody wakes up and scratches their head and says, what happened here? The spending will lead to $2 trillion in debt. People will wake up and say, well, what about all those cuts? What happened? I thought we were cutting out waste and fraud. And come September, the deficit for the year will be $2 trillion because we're not actually cutting the spending. Congress has to do the heavy lifting. We owe the American people an answer to this question. Exactly how many Republican seats are required in Congress to achieve a majority that will actually fight to lower government spending? I don't think the taxpayers need to wait for that fight any longer. I'm not willing to say, oh, just wait, young man, wait for another day. We'll be fixing this in 6 months from now. It never comes. This is the story of this place. Wait till another day. Wait till the sun shines. We'll finally cut some spending. Never comes. Someone must make a stand and fight. To that end, I offer a Doge Cuts 1.0 amendment that would codify the cuts in foreign aid, reducing USAID's budget by 83% and aligning with Secretary Rubio's recent decision to eliminate thousands of these programs. So what I am doing is not inconsistent with the Trump administration. What I am doing is in support of the Trump administration. What I am doing is taking the preliminary cuts that Secretary Rubio has given to foreign aid and making them law. Why? Because the whole judiciary is opposing the president. They're telling him he can't fire people, he can't cut spending. He needs Congress to step up and do their job. He needs the people who support the president need to be supporting the president's cuts. They need to be supporting an amendment, Doge 1.0, that puts those cuts into law. I'm not even talking about codifying all of the cuts. I'm only taking a small sliver of them in foreign aid. This is the low-hanging fruit. This is the worst of the worst. This is $3 million for girl-centric climate change in Brazil. This is $4.8 million for social media influencers in Ukraine. This is hundreds of thousands of dollars spent sending Ukrainian fashion designers to the Paris fashion show. This is waste, utter and simple waste, and it ought to be cut. Why would people tell you publicly they're for it and then vote against it? It doesn't seem to make any sense. What my amendment does is put Doge's findings into action, eliminating much of the funding for an agency that spent its tax dollars on woke entertainment and advocacy. It sets in law the reductions that the Trump administration has made known to be necessary. I applaud Doge's work to uncover these many instances of abuse of taxpayer dollars, and it's now Congress's turn to make the cuts stick. If we do not adopt my amendment, then taxpayers will simply continue spending substantial amounts of money to defund components of the government rather than using savings to pay down our mounting debt. In other words, you might cut it and think it's cut one day, but what if the courts say you have to spend it somewhere else? It never comes back. The cuts are never real. The only way the cuts the administration are making will ever be real, will ever be counted, and will ever lessen the debt in the country is to vote in Congress. That's what this is about. It would be the height of hypocrisy for Congress to pay lip service to Doge's exceptional work, support it on the superficial, and then vote against it when you have a chance to vote on it. Continuing to spend at this bill's level will add $2 trillion in debt. That is a fact. All of the newspapers reporting yesterday, it was all over the news, record-setting accumulation of debt. We've accumulated over $1 trillion and we're not halfway through the year. It's a record accumulation of debt. It only stops when people stand up and say enough is enough. The least we can do is make sure that it doesn't include the egregious spending that has come from the foreign aid, the craziness, the sex change operations in Guatemala, trans operas, trans comic books. All of these ludicrous things that no American supports will only go away, and will only go away with permanence if we vote for it. Before us is a chance to enact about $16 billion worth of DOJ's cuts in foreign aid. These cuts are only real in the long term if they're reflected in congressional action. If we continue to fund the federal government at the Biden administration levels, which is what this bill does, then the money from DOJ's hard-found savings will just be spent somewhere else. I urge all my colleagues who have praised DOJ's work to match their actions to their words and vote yes on this amendment. Thank you, and I yield back the remainder. Absence of a quorum.
Clerk call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.